insure your house. The same one, summer 2006, seemingly out of nowhere. New Century Financial, the country's second largest subprime only originator, has a pressing need for cash, having made 51.6 billion worth of subprime loans in 2005. Is discovering that too many in loans are going their way too fast, particularly trolling early payment default speaking. Those are loans where the borrowers are in default practically from the moment they agree to the loan. Early payment default can often trigger repurchase requests from investors, requiring the lender when they turn back. This happening to New Century in 2004. It repurchased million worth of bad loans in 2005. The number rose to 332.1 million by June on 2006. It had been forced to the repurchase in additional in default loans. Words 1. A New Century tried and two techniques for recirculating its repurchase loans is no longer working. In previous year, after buying defaulted mortgage out on securitization, it will simply stick them into new sale. According to one close observer, this worked because New Century loan balloon was growing so rapidly that the bad mortgage could be buried a small part of a big new sale. But by 2006, balloon is starting, and meanwhile, New Century is running low on cash. On August 17, TFO Petty sends an image to Brad Morris, the CEO. We start the quartet with in liquidity. Meanwhile, New Century is running low on cash. In August 17, CFO Petty sent an email to Brad Morris, the CEO. We start the quarter with a liquidity, and we're down to the less than 50 today. She writes, in explaining the problem, the company board Murray cities continue difficult secondary market conditions, leading to the warehouse line margin calls, higher investor kick outs, meaning that were investors are refusing to purchase lands, and the land report. Internal return management began receiving a weekly report monitoring, and the problem is entitled Stormwatch. Thus, Wall Street now about New Century problems? Of course it does. One Wall Street banker tells New Century that these problems aren't all the unusual according to a report done later by bankruptcy examiner. There are examiners with wide dramatic industry, wide increase in early payment default and lower origination volumes. Amazingly, Wall Street is still willing to extend a lifeline to New Century. The company raised in 142.5 million in the second half of 2006. Yet investors are largely left in the dark. New Century does disclose either the big increase in the payment default is staggering in 545 million. The backlog purchase claims that the company has received but hasn't yet paid. Instead, New Century tells investors that they invalid that repurchase request. Sent to fall 2006. Larry Litton in mortgage servicer. In 1988, he and his father, Larry Litton Sr., founded Lithium Loan Servicing, building into a one nation largest mortgage servicer inevitable that his service allowed the mortgage for subprime originator, including Bill Dallas Audit and WMC, which was founded by Amy Rand, in which GA Capital broke in 2005. The two combined are cracking on more than billion worth on the loan on year. Lithium also noticed that early payment defaults and soaring the mortgage originators and freaking out and the blaming hit. The WMC guys are saying just suck. Lithium recalled he remembers checking maybe we're doing something wrong. So Lithium comes out with that he calls an ultra aggressive move and delivering welcome package to the however's owners so there will be no confusion over where the mortgage check should be mailed. But when the Lithium employees arrive at newly purchased homes, they discover something truly startling. My people came back and said 30% of the house are vacant. Lithium recalled, in other words, borrower who closed on mortgage had so little means to make even the first payment that they never bothered to move in. Lithium calls Amy Rand and WMC. It's a kind of hard to collect payment when someone in there you make want to take a look at it. It tells you. It's on 3 December 2, 2006, mid-morning, and an auditorium and the office 3 management. Leo Raineri, yes, that the Leo Raineri is giving a speech. His tone and voice may be mild, but his work conveys something else entirely: anger, dismay, worry. The main topic on the subprime business, which now accounts for around quarters on nation mortgage, but which is clearly slumping. Raineri is on a panel with person from Fannie Mae, a banker represented by the Mortgage Banker Association, and the deputy controller on the currency. Their presentation are full on the one hand, on the other hand segregation. There is a general agreement the subprime mortgages are here to stay, a panel devoted to subprimes. Fraud focused entirely on borrower fraud. Incredible, not a single word is mentioned about the widespread. Raineri, however, has a much thinner view of the state and the subprime mortgage industry than the most others speaking today. Over the past few years, he has become horrified by what had happened to the mortgage-backed security business he had invented more innocent time. The lack of proper underwriting, Wall Street only is desired for poor quality loans, the way BBB tranches are being repackaged into a new AAA securities. This is not starting up the market. He will always use the assume that the vast majority of loan securitization will be good loans, not bad ones. Why would investors want to buy to minimize Fannie's and Freddie's role in the securitization business now laments the way they have been rendered irrelevant by the subprime securitizer. He can see now what an important and useful role the employers there were, he says, the gatekeepers, forcing mortgage companies to adhere to their underwriting standard. If a mortgage originator didn't follow Fannie and Freddie's underwriting standard, nobody would buy them, says Raineri. That standard had completely gotten pushed aside. We now can keep the market in check. The rating agencies, early government regulator, the private mortgage backed security market, IRA is in check by third eyes regulatory framework. He bemoans the layering of the risks on prime mortgage. He sneered at the phrase affordability products. The industry seems for some prime mortgage. He was and length on the rise on CDOs and major distribution mechanisms. On laments their bewildering. Complexity is nearly impossible. He says for investors to understand what they are buying, and he made a crucial point that Wall Street itself has largely missed that the CDO business has become a kind of daisy chain who is buying to the subordinated tranches. He asks, who's taking all the risks? The answer is in many cases nobody, no person. It is a team, another CDO. Imagine taking the support tranches on the CDOs and putting in another CDO, further diluting the information flow. Does the buyer really understand the risks entailed? The buy senior tranches. I know I buy senior tranches, but I like senior tranches to remain senior tranches. I like AAA to remain AAA. When Raineri finishes, an audience member asks a simple question. What do you see as the less than rosy scenario when the mortgage market goes into the toilet? I don't understand what the ripple effect will be, he replies. In sorts of people are holding risks that will be hard to track now. In some cases they wouldn't even know they are holding the risks. Same place a morning finally Roger thinks to himself and listen to Raineri. Someone is calling ISIS. Roner is a skeptical analyst who back in 2001 wrote the precision paper A Home Without Equity and Just Rental with Debt. In mid-2005, his source on the Fed started telling him that rates are going to rise significantly. This new smart part to cure excess speculation in housing. He is warning clients the housing market has peaked. In recent years, Rosner has continued to dig into the number underlying the housing boom in support. He says that we be pumped up against the larger number in however sheep, and then the official however sheep figures to the 4 years later with the subprime. We were on the way to the however sheep rate is 69%. That is a hike as I will ever go. The Rosner, the answer is clear no. His data shows the most on the frenzy hasn't even been about purchasing a place to live. Rosner Eureka moment comes when they see data showing that about 35% of the mortgage used to purchase home in the 1204 and 2005 are not for primary residents. The refugees are made possible by raising home values, which may not even be real, given the inflated appraisal. In fact, Alan Greenspan, his unknown study cost authorized in 2007 that about like Ranieri, Losner become worried about the CDO markets around the same time as Raineri's speech. Rosner approaches the finance professor at Drexel University. Rosner and Mason have also pondered some larger question: is housing is such an important component of U.S. social policy and the funding mechanisms for housing has become this shaky pyramid of debt. Does it really make sense to have the housing market and the margin on the hugely unstable funding? And inasmuch an investors around the world have sunk their money into the USA mortgage-backed securities, where the complication is the market start to crack, perhaps, or rather concerning the reputational pose to the USA capital markets. Scene 5, News Interfile. What's called HK document the converse improvement they can wait until to the next quarter result they had nice start. News Interfinancial Corporation to restate financial statement for the quarter ended March and September 2006. Part of the reason for the restatement the company says is to correct errors in the way it has accounted for its many report requests. The stock, which had hit a hike just a few months early, plunges 36% in one day. By March, the company admits that it is unable to file financial reports. Housing bubble, the company reported a quarterly loss before filing for a bankruptcy. The new paper offered further evidence on the lending problems and the stroke the fall. The Business Press wrote article after article about the rise of forest closures and the troubles suddenly hitting to the subprime companies. Payments on adjustable loans hit overstretched borrower, declared the Wall Street Journal in August 2006. Forest closure figures suggest how enders in for rocky ride. The journal said a month after that, Washington Mutual report that its home loan unity out to the 33 million in the third quarter. HSBC, which had been a major buyer on the second Lion mortgage, announced his loss and shut down in the purchase and on and on. The Kane credit and synthetic CDO was offering to the credit default swap. For that matter, the case to shorten the mortgage market was the credit default swap. Credit default swap corporate bonds were ubiquitous with a notional value of more than the 25 trillion. The national value of the credit default swap peaked. They were used by companies to protect against the possibility that another entity it did business with might default. They were used by banks to measure to the riskiness of the loan portfolio because their price reflects the market views of risk, and they were used the mortgage-backed security area by CDO underwriters to wrap to the super senior tranche. In the corporate bond market, traders were using credit default swaps to use a protection against it to the possibility that a bond they owned might default. They were also using them to get a bet that company might default even when the trader didn't own to the underlying bonds. This credit default swap had become a standardized meaning to the condition under which the buyers and sellers got paid were always the same. That the world market trend to involve risk holding and the comps. In the mortgage-backed security market, the credit default swaps that the people were using to ensure the super seniors were a kind of sure signs the buyer and the protection will be paid on the super senior tranche default. But no one talked on this way. They were focused on the regulatory capital advantage, and there were a customized agreement between two parties, which made them hard to trade because any buyer will have to understand on the complex term on the deal. But while couldn't you create a standardized credit default swap on mortgage-backed security the way anyone could play instead of they having to painstakingly scratch and turn with the party on the side? You could trade this instrument the way people the stock that will dramatically expand to the market. Then the more is so is you also publish it and index the price on mortgage-backed security. Wall Street likes to say the indices and they are good because they offer transparency. Everyone can see what the prices are and liquidity, meaning into easier to get in out or trade that are based on the public end. That's probably true, but it's also true that in this reduce complexity to the simplicity on the published number allow investors to understand the market when they really don't and create a frenzy and trading activity. The main benefits Wall Street. Three firms, Deutsche Bank, Goldman Sachs, and Bear Stearns led to dry tone credit default swaps and mortgage-backed security into the easily tradable standard set instrument. The group which included Deutsche Bank trader with Littman, Goldman trader Robert Camilla, and Bear trader Todd Cushman began meeting in the February 2005 to figure out what the holder and the share institution reside and when they should reside it. Contemporary on the short side, get is the harmony when the mortgage defaulted. When it was 19 days delinquent, the trader decided that the protection buyer should get paid the mortgage lot's value, which would be determined by the street fair and the sun instrument. Is on that made out for the loss value. They call it their concept pay as you go and poke. To tell the truth is not very glamorous. Littman later to the lumber for Michael Pittman. That wasn't quite true. The ABX measured in the mortgage market more easier it had been before, but even before in creation and hedge investor obstacle-led hedge fund manager primarily had sought a way to make British to better mortgage market. They had pushed Wall Street first to seal the customized credit default swaps and specific trends in the mortgage-backed security. The most famous of this hedge fund manager was Joe Paulson, who worldwide in making $4 billion, meeting against subprime mortgage. He was to the only one from Michael Burry. The hedge fund manager in California had become convinced after digging through months on paper, actually looking into the underlying loans on the housing market was going to crack. As early to spring 2005, he began to enter into trade with Street, firms in which he took a short position. To relieve the cause of the crisis was simple. Wall Street had substituted elaborate statistically based insurance schemes that with the aid and the efficiency in the financial markets were assumed to make old-fashioned credit analysis and human judgment irrelevant. Relief surprised Epiphany had come years before when he listened to a presentation by a news interested cubes and investment confirmed. He was thrilled by the fact to the top 85% New Century Mortgage were cash out refinancing. He asked the New Century execute about the default rate for refinancing and a portion of the mortgage that were used to purchase a new home. The man said he didn't know, but speculated that they probably weren't any different. This didn't ring true. Relief, whose prints with corporate bonds, suggested the power were much higher when the debt and to buy on the insider that when it went for general corporate purpose. Red Left had another insight even back to the he could see that the business models long touted by the subprime originator made no sense. The companies were saying that they could grow market share on the one hand while still using underwriting standards that they weighted on the borrowers likely to default. Even see this movie before. He said, "You can have higher standard on the show brochure. You can even have different standard in the end you without lending money to the people who can pay it back. And this isn't a good business model for a public company." By 2006, through the combination of the FPX index and the new credit default swap market made it possible to short subprime securitization. Relief were ready to take the plunge. We had negative feelings about the incentive above some requests. Above a few other lenders we look for security with those mortgage. Relief and Vigilante would later write that their biggest fear was that trade would quickly disappear. The mortgage market was so obviously headed for trouble that by early 2006, when we started shorting mortgage-backed security, we feared the fun would be over before we were fully invested. The world in panic. We needed what had worried the continue rather than the trade vanishing too quickly when repeatedly found ourselves scratching our heads in this belief that we culture still more mortgage security that they were obviously going to blow up a year long as the headline flew. A bunch of originators running into trouble and we foreclosure, raising Red Left added to the short position every time there was a big piece of news. After the crisis hit at the radar and the journalists began to look back and they had happened into the critical years in the 2006 and 2007, a convention of wisdom sprang out, according to which only a tiny handful of people had the insight to realize that the subprime mortgages were kegs and dynamite ready to blow. But Relief believed to the high insight was not nearly as unique as being portrayed in his book and Michael Lewis. The Big Short on the Gregory Zuckerman, the greatest trade ever, we chronicle John Paulson's massive bid against the housing market. By Red Leaf account, there were maybe 50 or so hedge funds that would likely have considered this kind of trade. At least 20 of them, maybe more, were heavily short subprime bonds. If you look at the disinterested, the smart player, he says, a lot got it. Long before anybody thought to the use credit default swap to short mortgage bonds, Springfield had taken to combining credit default swaps and the variety of the corporate bonds and creating CDOs out of them. They were called synthetic CDOs because the CDOs didn't contain real collateral. Rather, they were based on the performance of existing bonds held by someone else. In the street parlance, they reference the real bonds. The gains and losses will be real enough, with the underlying collateral was one remote, unlikely a cash CDO that the held collateral, and in which all the investors were long ago to payments from the underlying corporate bonds. By 2005, The hot new thing in the market was correlation trading, going long one trade, maybe triple A, while shorting another trade, the triple B. Said it was all driven by demand by investors for a particular slide or rigs and a model to purported to show what the spread of the difference in price between various tranches should be. It also allowed firms to make the correlational trade with immense leverage because their model showed that the trade balance and therefore carried little risk. In the spring of 2005, a warning shot was fired about the dangers in this brave new world when the credit rating agencies unexpectedly downgraded the debt on the General Motors and Ford. The synthetic CDO share gain could be hottest market in all fixed income to be a disaster in the market. He noted ominously that many players in the market weren't capable of assessing the risks. Michael Gibson, the Federal Reserve Chief Trading Risk Analysis, told the magazine. What we're hearing from market participants is that their minority and CDO investors, perhaps 10%, who do not really understand what they are getting into, say an unnamed market participant. I imagine the number is higher. It's mind-boggling how much data you have to get a handle on to measure your exposure. Risk expert Leslie Rapp explained it. There could be a substantial difference between what a theoretical model tells you something is worth and where buyer and seller are willing to transact. And yet the appeal was empowering. There was so much demand for today's securities. Who worked with Chris Ricciardi and Mary Lynch to the use credit in ABS. The availability of the set had been a stick point. There are finite amount on the term you said. He pointed out that the authors on mortgage were crafted into residential mortgage-backed security. There was only about 10 billion to 12 billion in the lowest rate triple B tranches, since those were the tranches were the best yield and therefore were the most attractive raw materials for CDOs. But with a synthetic CDO, it didn't matter anymore. In the originator could make a new mortgage and already when the business entirely because synthetic CDO made a credit default swap, referring some mortgage bonds that already exist. You didn't need any more bonds. You could count the same risky tranches again and again. Five, 10, 20 times if you wanted. If you could do this quickly without waiting around to buy real securities. The gains were amplified too because synthetic CDOs are settled soon. Someone has to lose and someone has to win. Even after all the damage has been done, some would make the argument that there's nothing wrong with this. It's a free market. Should then our participants be able to express their view? Our offices or phrasing the pair on the duration of mortgage-backed securities? Maybe so, but it's to the ability to short mortgage-backed security and maybe even the construction, the index more and kind transparency to the market, to the synthetic CDO2 and the way. Mike Burris and Relay bets and Eastern holding the other side. On this bet, our fund investors who actually want to be long a strange triple B rate mortgage-backed security back to the new central loans. It's called Eastern resembled to bets in triple A rated securities. The way the other side and the best wasn't someone who was investigate to the mortgage market security, library, and Red Leaf didn't. Red Leaf did. And two, he was betting on this performance. It was someone who was buying and reading and thought he couldn't lose money. Negative news on housing next the market. Barry Rose's early 20s letter to the investor, your mortgage spreads in the cash market fell substantially, which means that the market was acting as if there was less risk instead more that this development very well is indicative of rapid city activity.